Hi everyone, welcome to an in-depth review about the new upcoming free-to-play MMORPG Blue Protocol. Blue Protocol is an anime-style MMORPG developed by Bandai Namco and is scheduled to release spring in Japan and the second half of 2023 for NAEU. I have had the opportunity to play the network test and I have spent hours in the game testing through multiple aspects while also streaming them. During this test, I have went through the gameplay experience, combat, gameplay loop, class system, and potential pay-to-win aspects of the game. TLDR for this, the game is similar to numerous other games like Monster Hunter, Final Fantasy XIV, and other old-school MMORPG at specific aspects, and you might be familiar with some of them. And with that, my name is Kanima, and here is a complete breakdown of the Blue Protocol network test. Be mindful, however, that these are taken through the network test, which has the limitation of level 20 and Adventurer rank 4, and the experience could drastically change when the game is fully released. We begin with the most common question of every free-to-play MMO, which is its monetization aspect. During the network test, there are limited access and currencies that are not used, so I am unable to review this aspect fully. However, we do have access to certain aspects and also statements that was made by the developer themselves. First of all, Blue Protocol does not have trading or auction houses. When it comes to materials and progression, most of it will come through your own farming and grinding. If you ever play Monster Hunter, this would be more reminiscent to that game. People are skeptical and saying that no trading kills the MMO aspect of the game, but I have a different opinion on that. MMO is not all about trading, but it is about the shared space and interaction inside the game, and Blue Protocol retains this aspect throughout my hours in the network test. No trading also means no paying to buy materials on auction houses to instantly buy the best gear. It also mitigates real money trading and botting issue, as you can't infinitely farm materials and sell it for currency. For those of you that play Lost Ark in NA or EU, you will be very familiar with this concept. Second aspect that we have already known is the dungeon reward ticket. Dungeons are part of the game in which you will fight through mobs and bosses to earn rewards. Dungeon reward ticket is a token that can be used to effectively double the rewards of the dungeon. This can be seen throughout the green letters where it explains the extra rewards should you use the ticket. Note that the dungeon entries itself are unlimited, so if you are a grinder, you can just grind the dungeon again twice and you would get relatively the same reward. Every day, players will be given 3 tickets for free that can be used freely on any dungeon with a limit up to 10, effectively acting as a rest bonus system. To be simple about this, you can just consume your 10 tickets and not log in for 3 days and you would be fine. This ticket, as we have known, will be monetized, although they strictly say that it will be limited and you cannot buy an unlimited number of them. These are the 2 aspects we already know when it comes to the monetization of the game. We do have more information about their cosmetic and gacha monetization as well. While they emphasize on selling cosmetics, I will not go through them as there are no further information yet about this in the network test. As it is a hot topic of discussion for players, I would like to preface this and say that everyone's definition of pay to win is different. With this explained, I will let everyone judge for themselves whether the game is pay to win or not, but I encourage people not to dismiss others' opinions and see them through their point of view. Moving on into the class system, Blue Protocol's class system is very reminiscent to Final Fantasy XIV class system, in which you can create a character and you can play all classes within that character. There are no alts required, and since there are no trading, you cannot make multiple accounts and benefit from them as well. This might be unfortunate for those that likes alt system, but most players usually prefer this kind of class system. To change classes, simply equip a weapon corresponding to the class itself before leaving the main city. These classes have their own separate level, however, so you will need to re-level the classes separately. When it comes to the gear itself, crafting gear is not limited to the specific class level, so you are able to craft a high-level gear on a low-level class, albeit the weapon itself will be synced down to the corresponding class level. This allows you to craft endgame weapon on the class and not worry about crafting multiple weapons just to progress through your secondary classes. When it comes to roles, This game does not have a Trinity-based system, and so far, there is no limitation on duplicates as well. There are however classes like Blade Warden that has taunt ability and damage reduction ability, which lets them retain aggro of enemies similar to a tank, and classes like Keen Strider that has healing and supportive capability as well. These classes by no means are necessary due to the style of the action combat being active and manual dodging on enemy attacks, but having them in a party will be beneficial. For example, I have had a matchmaking into a dungeon with 5 spellcasters, and while we can clear it just fine, we had to constantly kite back and are unable to do massive pulls since none of us are able to take major hits. And with that, let's segue into the class-specific combat system itself. To explain it in simple terms, the basic gameplay for some classes is similar to something like a Diablo. Classes are unique in their combat system, and some will play differently than others. Although we are currently limited to 5 classes, Spellcaster is an example of one of the most unique gameplay-wise due to its resource-based class identity. Classes have their own gear and skills, and when it comes to combat, the one that plays the most part is the skills you bring. Each classes are limited to 4 active skills, 1 ultimate skills, 2 echo skills, and your basic skills with left and right click. Basic skills and ultimate skills are fixed and upgraded as you level higher, while you can change your active and echo skill. This can create a unique skill builds depending on what content you are doing. You will be using your active skill as needed as they have cooldown, and during cooldown, you will focus on your basic skills. How active the game is during combat is dependent on your class and the bosses. This is not limited to all classes however, as class identity can significantly change how it plays. For example, Spellcaster does not have cooldown on their active skills, but rely on their own resource system called EP. Their active skills are spells that consume EP without cooldown, and they have to regenerate EP through other active skills or by manually regenerating them through basic skills. This creates a unique gameplay focused on using specific spells on certain situations, while also recharging the resource that acts like a cooldown. Combat is not all about classes, but also the encounter with dungeons and bosses itself. Through the network test, you are able to access some of the lower level dungeons and arenas. Since these are all low level content, I will not assume the endgame bosses will be the same. Mobs and dungeons are relatively straightforward in that they are basic mobs and you can either group them, do massive pulls and AoE them down, or slowly go through them. Some have more threatening attacks, but it is straightforward just like any other MMO dungeons. The bosses on the other hand have specific patterns that needs to be actively avoided. When it comes to bosses, the gameplay is similar to something like a Monster Hunter with their telegraph attacks and can be manually dodged as well. Classes have their own mobility skill which has invulnerability frames, and players can use that as necessary. Some attacks are ground-based for example, and you can also just jump over them. With these two combat aspects combined, it creates a relatively active gameplay. Although I would like to add that Keen Strider, which is the archer class, is the most simplistic of them all, as being a range means less involved with boss attacks, while also still using the cooldown system. Since this class is one of the most popular class, I would say that do not judge the combat system based on this class only, as Spellcaster's unique class combat system and melee classes' interaction with bosses creates a layer of complexity. On the other hand, the archer class has a unique weak point system where shooting bosses' weak points increases your damage as well, which might matter at bigger bosses in endgame. Most testers uses auto-lock system and is unaware of this optimization when it comes to the archer class, which could be its own layer of complexity. When it comes to the open world system and grinding, Blue Protocol uses one mega server with instance and channels. The interaction of open world is similar to old school MMORPG, in which mobs are relatively threatening, and for some classes, pulling too many mobs could create a disaster. Each channel can house a decent amount of players, and I have been in combat with around more but not limited to 20 other players to kill a rare mob together. At the same time, rare materials are actually rare materials and it is difficult to obtain. This is one of the main points of grinding of the game aside from dungeons. During the beta, it creates a good shared space gameplay as you can see farming parties along certain areas of the map. For example, Goblin Fang is needed to craft the next weapon and plenty of people are farming goblins together in this specific area. I am not sure how this will evolve as most people enter endgame later, but during the start, this shared space experience is a great experience for me personally, as it creates a sense of camaraderie during grinding which I haven't found in many other MMORPGs. Gathering in the open world is simplistic and not really interactive, but something you can do along the way. But due to the rarity of materials, I would say that gathering nodes spawns way too slow and developers will need to adjust this. Fortunately, developers have stated that they are aware of this issue and might fix this by the time game releases. Gearing system in this game is very similar to something like a Monster Hunter. The loop is simply farm rare materials to craft better weapons and echoes to tackle higher ranked dungeons and bosses. They do not have enhancement system or gear breaking system. However, there is RNG involved as weapons have bonuses and sockets where you can improve it. So far on the weapon crafting, jackpot chances are 25%, so it is not necessarily a low chance. However, endgame weapons might have a different chance. Since there are no limitations on dungeons and farming, you can just keep crafting the weapon if necessary. For socket system, I have not delved too deep into it, but to put it simply, you can improve the weapon by socketing certain effects into it. Each weapon can have up to 4 sockets, and crafting weapon with 1 socket is not the end of the world, as you can expand the socket yourself. It is unclear however if they will monetize this or not, but we will have to see how relevant this will be later at release. Moving on into the progression system, this is where I believe the game still requires a lot of polishing. The game uses a battle power system which is akin to something like an item level. This system is a cumulative score of all of your gear which includes your weapon, echo skill, and passive insignia. When it comes to progressing at first, it is relatively simple as you can just go through the story and reach certain parts of the game. At one point however, it presents you with a 720 battle power recommendation, which is a massive jump and will confuse players. Their explanation is heavily lacking, even when I can speak Japanese myself, and if you are a foreigner, most likely you will be stuck at around 200 battle power, unable to progress. To achieve this battle item, the new weapon is required but the materials is locked behind a 270 battle power dungeon. As explained here, it creates a wall of progression and players will be stuck here and either leaves or try long enough to figure out how to raise their battle power through horizontal progression. In my opinion, they need to create a middle gear in between these walls of progression and have better explanation of what people should do. To give an example, the starting weapon you have are level 2 weapons, while the next weapon is at level 10. This is what creates the gap of battle power and in turn creates this wall of progression. I believe that it is better to have a different level 5 weapon to allow people to progress through the battle power smoothly, without forcing them to do horizontal progression. If their intention is to enforce horizontal progression however, then they need a much more detailed explanation and include it in the main quest as to not confuse players. When it comes to the horizontal progression, they have a relatively interesting system called Adventure Book, where it gives you certain quests that acts like a side quest to help you progress horizontally. This system by itself is not bad, albeit repetitive, as they have duplicate quests and are not emphasized at all. If the developers want to enforce players to progress horizontally, then they should have emphasized this system instead. Now that we have covered most of the gameplay system, let's focus on the visual and optimizations of the game. In my opinion, Blue Protocol has done a great job of the visual aspects of the characters, open world, and skills. For an anime-style game, the open world looks great and the dynamic weather translates well into the environment. Class skills also has good visual clarity and certain skills adjust to your weapon elemental effects. Some might say that the class skills are not impactful enough, but at the same time, I would argue that more visual effects can hamper the gameplay instead. An example of this is the ultimate skills, where it feels great and impactful, but the use of it can block visuals and bosses mechanics. Character interactions are also designed pretty well, as they can interact with each other through emotes. For example, you can hold hands with players and walk along with them, which creates a different kind of feeling when interacting with other players. Other examples are dancing with other players, which will slowly sync your dance together, or playing rock paper scissors through the emotes. Optimization wise, the game runs relatively well on my current specs. My current specs is Ryzen 7 5800X and RTX 3070. And while these specs might be considered mid to upper spec, I can play the game smoothly while also streaming it. The exception is the main city, where there are a lot of players, in which sometimes my FPS drop to 30 to 40. In conclusion, I would personally rate the game in its network test state a 7.5 out of 10. The game itself is great, and if you're a fan of the other games that has similar system, you will probably enjoy it. Personally, I'm a fan of most of the systems, aside from the old school MMORPG type grind, which can get repetitive. Some of these issues can of course be fixed by the time it launched in any EU, but in its network state, I do believe that it's a good MMO experience, albeit being a new MMO, requires polishing on certain aspects. This concludes the in-depth review of the network test version of Blue Protocol. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next one.